A word of prayer, and I guess we'll get started. We're going to be in 1 Samuel chapter 27. Lord, we just thank you for this day and this opportunity. Lord, we thank you for our services this morning, Lord. We thank you for the people that came out. And we pray tonight, Lord, that as we look at your word, God, that you'll be a blessing to us and help us. In Jesus' name, amen. So if you remember, not once but two times, David has spared Saul's life. Y'all remember that? One time in the cave, and one time he come up on him while he's sleeping and could have struck him down with a spear and pinned him to the ground. David said no, even though his men were saying, please, please let us do that. But God said, no, I'm not going to strike the Lord's anointed. And, it's easy sometimes, people will give you all kinds of advice sometimes. Sometimes it's good and godly, but you're going to have to, in the long run, all in all, you're going to have to determine that for yourself. What's the Lord telling me? He can use other people to help you make decisions, but to kill Saul right then and there, that would have been a rash decision, because David didn't anoint Saul as king. Samuel anointed him as king, but that was God's decision to make. So if he struck down, it's going to have to come from another hand. David is a king now. By the time he actually took up the kinghood, I don't think that's a word, but the kingdom, he had been anointed 15 years earlier. Did y'all know that? And he still wasn't on the throne. And he still would not kill Saul. So all these years later, from the time he was a young fellow till now, he's been anointed king, but he's not been put in place. Saul is still acting as a king, although the kingdom has been stripped from him. I got the hiccups. So anyways, it says David went his way. Saul returned to his place. Saul cried and was apologizing and telling him, Saul's last words to David after this was, "Blessed be you, my son David. You will do many things and will succeed in them." And they left. They split up, went their own ways. And then it says in 27, then David said in his heart, "Now I shall perish one day by the hand of Saul." He knew what was going on. Saul wasn't going to give up trying to kill him. He was going to keep on. If you can't get here on time, just get here when you can.
Yes, sir.
We're in 1 Samuel 27.
Thank you, sir. Just getting started. I got my back. You had to go back and get it.
So Saul, David knew, Saul, he said all this good stuff about me and everything, but he ain't going to give up. He's going to keep coming after me. David knew that. That's some good discernment right there. There's nothing better for me than that I should escape to the land of the Philistines. Then Saul will despair of seeking me any longer within the borders of Israel, and I shall escape out of his hand. So it says in verse 2, it says, so David arose and went over, he and the 600 men who were with them, to Achish, the son of Maoch, king of Gath. And David lived with Achish at Gath with the Philistines, he and his men, every man with his household, and David with his two wives, Ahinoam of Jezreel and Abigail of Carmel, Nabal's widow. And when it was told Saul that David had fled to Gath, he no longer sought him. Then David said to Achish, or Achish, I don't know how you pronounce that, if I have found favor in your eyes, let a place be given me in one of your country towns, that I may dwell there. For why should your servant dwell in the royal city with you? So that day Achish gave him Ziklag. Therefore Ziklag has belonged to the kings of Judah to this day. And the number of the days that David lived in the country of the Philistines was 1 year and 4 months. Now don't y'all see that as kind of odd right there? the Philistines were the sworn enemies of Israel. And now, here David goes, and he lives amongst them. You know, and Achish says, well, I know they're having a kind of a civil war going on between him and Saul, so, you know, I'm going to let him come in here. You remember David went there before, you know, tried to escape there before, and remember he thought, well, I might have got myself in a bind, and he went acting like he was crazy, and scratching at the gate and slobbering and all that kind of stuff. I don't know what brought all that on. But what do you think, you know, he has shown some good judgment about how he's spared Saul and done some of these other things, but you think he's using good judgment right now? I mean, we can have an opinion about this. I ain't saying it's necessarily right or wrong, but is this what the Lord would want him to do, you think?
Yeah.
You think so?
Yeah, because it's in the Bible.
Okay.
It is written.
It is written.
It was there
Well,
for us to decide.
I disagree personally. I mean, you can believe what you want to believe. It don't matter. But I'm thinking, you know, David's a man just like any other man. And I think by this time he was wore out and tired from running from Saul. And like it says, he knows Saul ain't going to give up on him. You know, he'll come back after him again. So he's thinking, well, I can go there and be protected. And I think that decision leads him into other bad decisions. So let's just read on here in verse 8. It says, yeah, he's figuring, well, Saul ain't going to come after me as long as I'm here. And I'm kind of ingratiated into this, in this pagan king, you know. I've got him where he's done giving me a town where I can stay, you know. It says, now David and his men went up and made raids against the Geshurites, the Girzites, and the Amalekites, for these were the inhabitants of the land from of old, as far as Shur to the land of Egypt. All those guys were ancient enemies of Israel, but he's going out and making raids against them. And David would strike the land and would leave neither man nor woman alive, but would take away the sheep, the oxen, the donkeys, the camels, and the garments, and come back to Achish. When Achish asked, where have you made a raid today? David would say, against the Negev of Judah. The Negev was the desert. David would say, against the Negev of Judah, or against the Negev of the Jerahmeelites, or against the Negev of the Kenites. And David would leave neither man nor woman alive to bring news to Gad, thinking, lest they should tell about us and say, so David has done. So all these people, these tribes, they were allies of the Philistines. Or at least in the, at least maybe not friendship, but, you know, I would think they were allies. But he's killing all of them, women, children, the whole bunch of them, so they won't go back and tell the king of the Philistines, you know, well, it's David attacked us, you know. So he's using a little subterfuge here and some cruelty also. You remember later on when David was he wanted to build the temple. You know, God told him, you're not going to build the temple, you're a man of blood. And I think this is some of the stuff the Lord was talking about it. And David, he was like those kings in the old times. So they could be very cruel, you know, and they would slaughter. They would destroy. So all the men and women were being killed, and you know the children too. As such was his custom, all the while he lived in the country of the Philistines for a year and 4 months. And Achish trusted David, thinking he has made himself an utter stench to his people Israel. Therefore, he shall always be my servant. So David was lying to him about where he was going. And so here is Achish thinking, yeah, the people of Israel, they'll totally reject him for the stuff he's done. So he trusted him. Not everybody trusted him in the Philistines, as you'll see, but he did. So let's look at verse 28 too, or chapter 28. So in those days, before we go any further, y'all got anything you want to add about any of this right here? Yeah. That's right. That's right. In those days, the Philistines gathered their forces for war to fight against Israel. So here they go. And Achish said to David, understand that you and your men are to go out with me in the army. So remember, you're coming with me to fight against Israel, which is your country. That's the predicament David done got himself into. David said to Achish, very well, you shall know what your servant can do. And Achish said to David, very well, I will make you my bodyguard for life. Now hear this pagan king, that's how much he trusted David and his men. They're going to be his bodyguard. Now Samuel had died, and all Israel had mourned for him and buried him in Ramah, his own city. And Saul had put the mediums and the necromancers out of the land. This was when Saul was still trying to, before he kind of fell off from his own pride, you know. He started off as a good king, you know, obeying the Lord. He put all those funny business people, you know, with the necromancers. You know what a necromancer is? Bringing up people from the dead, you know. Spiritualists, like we would say about Ouija boards and stuff like that nowadays. But witches, that kind of stuff. No. But anyhow, he put all of them and the spiritual mediums and the necromancers out of the land. He got rid of them all. You know, they make TV shows about them now, or you can talk to your dead family and all that. Don't go for that stuff. It's wickedness. Sin. God hates it. And it says the Philistines assembled and came and encamped at Shunam. And Saul gathered all Israel, and they camped at Gilboa. When Saul saw the army of the Philistines, he was afraid, and his heart trembled greatly. He done lost that courage that God had given him. You know, when he started off, God gave him strength and wisdom, and also courage, you know, to fight. Well, he saw now there was trouble. Verse 6, and when Saul inquired of the Lord did not answer him, either by dreams or by Urim or by the prophets. So why wasn't God answering Saul? God had rejected him. Saul was rejected from the Lord. You know, and he was living in deep sin at this time.
I was going to mediums and we consulted with them, so compromise.
Yeah. So this is what Saul said to his servants in verse 7. He says, seek out for me a woman who is a medium, that I may go to her and inquire of her. And his servant said to him, behold, there is a medium at Endor. In other words, a witch is like it called. This was a witch. And let me just tell y'all, this witchcraft, folks think it's a game nowadays. It ain't funny. We got a professing witch right down here at the lake. And you know, I'm not gonna go off on her, but I can tell you right now that stuff ain't a joke. I mean, we can treat it as a joke. Why are you laughing, Mary? I just said it wasn't a joke. I didn't mean to call. But you know, this stuff, honestly, it's for real, and God does not like it. And Israel, you know, they tolerated it many times. And it says, so Saul disguised himself and put on other garments and went. He and two with him. He did not want this woman to know that he was the king. And they came to the woman by night. This stuff right here is kind of interesting, and you can have varying opinions about what was going on here. We'll talk about it. And he said, divine for me by a spirit, and bring up for me whomever I shall name to you. The woman said to him, surely you know what Saul has done. She didn't know she was talking to Saul. How he has cut off the mediums and the necromancers from the land. Why then are you laying a trap for my life to bring about my death? But Saul swore to her by the Lord, as the Lord lives, no punishment shall come upon you for this thing. Then the woman said, whom shall I bring up for you? He said, bring up Samuel for me. Now Samuel had died, remember. When the woman saw Samuel, she cried out with a loud voice. And the woman said to Saul, why have you deceived me? You are Saul. Now here's where it starts to get interesting. He told her who to call up. And supposedly Samuel came up from the dead, as a haint, as a ghost. But the woman was shocked. She cried out, why have you done this? So if she knew what she was supposed to do and she knew she had the power to do it, why was she so shocked when he appeared?
She didn't have the power to do it.
Huh?
That she didn't have the power to do it.
I don't think she really had the power to do it.
She should have thought
I think
that
she
was
was a
Saul.
fraud.
She had the
Yeah.
knowledge.
Yeah,
I think she was a fraud, but she knew she was a fraud, so when it really happened,
yeah,
how that movie goes whenever that a woman really was talking spirits that freaked her out. I was like, wait a minute.
yeah.
That's what's supposed to happen.
Yeah, yeah. That's the way I look at it right now. And the king said to her, do not be afraid, what do you see? And the woman said to Saul, I see a God coming up out of the earth. And he said to her, what is his appearance? And she said, an old man is coming up, and he is wrapped in a robe. And Saul knew that it was Samuel, and he bowed his face to the ground and paid homage. Now, I've heard different things about this. God really frowns on this kind of stuff. And I've listened to several things about this and read different things from different guys talking about it, theologians and all that kind of stuff. And I read one that said, this wasn't Samuel, this was a demon coming up and pretending to be Samuel. And that's more the way I would lean. I don't think you can just call up somebody from the dead like that. And I think a demon appeared before him, but that's just my opinion. I don't know. Maybe God did it, but you know what? There's a great gulf fixed between us and people who have gone on to be with the Lord. I hear people talking about it all the time. Oh, my mom appeared to me, and that sort of stuff. Or my loved one here appeared to me in a vision, or showed up here and there. I don't believe that. I don't believe it because, once they've left this world, that's it. They're in another world. They're not coming back to this world. Huh?
I've dreamed about my mom.
Oh, yeah. I dream about,
It was a visit.
yeah. I still dream about my grandparents sometimes. They've been dead for a lot of years. But, anyhow, this is just my thinking. Y'all don't have to agree with it, but
I have to slightly disagree with you because when he did appear to her, he did make a prophecy, and it did come true.
Yeah.
So a demon wouldn't have any truth in them, so why would they make a prophecy and for it to come true if they're liars?
well, I don't know. I think maybe he knew what the plan was fixing to happen, but I don't know. Like I say, that ain't nothing I'm going to get hung up on. But the big point is Saul really sinned by going to this medium in the first place. Because you're entering into territory right there that we don't have any business playing in, you know. But we don't need to dilly-dally in this kind of stuff. We need to stay away from it. But so anyhow, verse 15, it says, Then Samuel said to Saul, Why have you disturbed me by bringing me up? Saul answered, I am in great distress, for the Philistines are warring against me, and God has turned away from me and answers me no more, either by prophets or by dreams. Therefore I have summoned you to tell me what I shall do. So he wasn't getting no answer from God, so this is what he turns to. Remember, this is the guy that had run all these people out, the witches and the necromancers and the sorcerers. He'd run them out of the country. And now he's going to them because God won't speak to him. Therefore I have summoned you to tell me what I shall do. And Samuel said, Why then do you ask me, since the Lord has turned from you and become your enemy? The Lord has done to you as he spoke by me. For the Lord has torn the kingdom out of your hand and given it to your neighbor David. Because you did not obey the voice of the Lord and did not carry out his fierce wrath against Amalek, therefore the Lord has done this thing to you this day. Moreover, the Lord will give Israel also with you into the hands of the Philistines, and tomorrow you and your sons shall be with me. The Lord will give the army of Israel also into the hands of the Philistines. Then Saul fell at once full length on the ground, filled with fear because of the words of Samuel. And there was no strength in him, for he had eaten nothing all day and all night. And the woman came to Saul, and when she saw that he was terrified, she said to him, Behold, your servant has obeyed you. I have taken my life in my hand and have listened to what you have said to me. Now therefore, you also obey your servant. Let me set a morsel of bread before you and eat, that you may have strength when you go on your way. He refused and said, I will not eat. But his servants, together with the woman, urged him, and he listened to their words. So he arose from the earth and sat on the bed. Now the woman had fattened a calf in the house, and she quickly killed it, and she took flour and kneaded it and baked unleavened bread of it, and she put it before Saul and his servants, and they ate. Then they rose and went away that night. So Saul, he's done been told, you're about to die.
Sounds like he was giving him good sound advice.
Yeah, he was telling him, you're about to die. You know. And Saul definitely believed him because he done fell out. And he knew, you know, there was nothing he could do.
Linda, it's me, she butchered the calf. Right, I mean, how long did that take?
Yeah,
Calf.
I mean, it looked like that would have taken quite a few hours to do all that right there. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that was a lot of work went on right there. Feeding her men too, or his men also.
It was all supernatural.
Yeah. Now the Philistines had gathered all their forces at Aphek, and the Israelites were encamped by the spring that is in Jezreel. And the lords of the Philistines were passing on by hundreds and by thousands, and David and his men were passing on in the rear of Achish, the commanders of the Philistines. The commanders of the Philistines said, What are these Hebrews doing here? Achish said to the commanders of the Philistines, Is this not David, the servant of Saul, king of Israel, who had been with me now for days and years? And since he deserted to me, I have found no fault in him to this day. But the commanders of the Philistines were angry with him. And the commanders of the Philistines said to him, Send the man back, that he may return to the place to which you have assigned him. He shall not go down with us to battle, lest in the battle he become an adversary to us. For how could this fellow reconcile himself to his Lord? Would it not be with the heads of the men here? Is not this David, of whom they sing to one of one another in dances. Saul has struck down his thousands and David his 10,000s. So the Philistines, they knew all about that little song that was sung. So these commanders of the Philistines, let me just tell you this, they were 5 major cities of the Philistines. And this king right here, Achish, he wasn't the only king. They had other kings, and these commanders of these other cities and other forces, they didn't like this idea. Now here was David and them, his army was behind them, and they're thinking, well, if they get in there and get hot, they're liable to turn on us, And Achish had confidence in them, but they didn't. They didn't have confidence in them at all. And I don't know what he would have done, to be honest with you. He probably would have turned on them. Then Achish called David and said to him, as the Lord lives, you have been honest, and to me it seems right that you should march out and in with me in the campaign. The problem is David hadn't been honest. You remember what he was doing, attacking all them other cities and lying about them to the king. Now I found nothing wrong in you from the day of your coming to me to this day. Nevertheless, the Lords do not approve of you. So go back now, go peaceably, that you may not displease the lords of the Philistines. Then David said to Achish, but what have I done? What have you found in your servant from the day I entered your service until now, that I may not go and fight against the enemies of my lord the king? And Achish answered David and said, I know that you are as blameless in my sight as an angel of God. Nevertheless, the commanders of the Philistines have said, he shall not go up with us into the battle. Now then, rise early in the morning with the servants of your Lord who came with you, and start early in the morning and depart as soon as you have light. So David set out with his men early in the morning to return to the land of the Philistines. But the Philistines went up to Jezreel. That's where they're going. They leaving out. Y'all got anything on that right there? All right.
I find it interesting that the Lord did not want him to fight with them. And in doing so, I think God's problem is because if he's not fighting with them, they won't be fighting against the Israelites.
That's right.
But automatically, I make them his favorite in their eyes as another king.
Right.
Because he's already been anointed. So imagine how that would look upon him if he did fight against the Israelites.
See, that's the thing about it. Of course, you can't read people's minds, but David has already spared Saul's life twice. That's what makes me think, he's not going to suddenly change and go up against Saul and his armies. I just don't see that happening. In my mind, I believe he was going to turn on him. That's my thinking. Because he's already spared the King Saul's life twice. And now he's going to go up against this army. He'd already been lying to the king of the Philistines about who he was attacking. I think his plan was to get the Philistines in between Saul's army and his army and turn on them. And those other lords of the Philistines, they didn't trust him. And I can understand that. I wouldn't have trusted him either. But that's just my thinking. Now when David and his men came to Ziklag on the 3rd day, the Amalekites had made a raid against the Negev and against Ziklag. They had overcome Ziklag and burned it with fire and taken captive the women and all who were in it, both small and great. They killed no one, but carried them off and went their way. They were going to make slaves out of them. That was David and all his men. And when David and his men came to the city, they found it burned with fire, and their wives and sons and daughters taken captive. Then David and the people who were with them raised their voices and wept until they had no more strength to weep. David's 2 wives had also been taken captive, Ahinoam of Jezreel and Abigail, the widow of Nabal of Carmel. And David was greatly distressed. For the people spoke of stoning him, because all the people were bitter in soul, each for his sons and daughters. But David strengthened himself in the Lord. He strengthened himself in the Lord. I always like that. You know, sometimes when things are not going our way, do you know what it is to strengthen yourself in the Lord?
Yes.
How do you do that? How do you strengthen yourself in the Lord?
Get in his presence and come
Get in his presence.
believe his words and
Yeah.
promises.
Study, look at his word and believe it, and pray.
Believe those promises.
And pray. You know, God will show you what to do, how to get,
Yes.
and that's what he did. You know, he'd been with the rest of them weeping until they had no more strength to weep, and then it says he strengthened himself in the Lord, in the Lord his God. And David said to Abiathar the priest, the son of Ahimelech, "Bring me the ephod." So Abiathar brought the ephod to David, and David inquired of the Lord, "Shall I pursue after this band? Shall I overtake them?" He answered them, "Pursue, for you shall surely overtake and shall surely rescue." So David set out, and the 600 men who were with him, and they came to the brook Besor, where those who were left behind stayed. And David pursued, he and 400 men. 200 men stayed behind, who were too exhausted to cross the brook Besor. You notice here, David, he had entreated from the Lord, and the Lord answered him. They found an Egyptian in the open country and brought him to David, and they gave him bread, and he ate. They gave him water to drink, and they gave him a piece of a cake of figs and 2 clusters of raisins. And when he had eaten, his spirit revived, for he had not eaten bread or drunk water for 3 days and 3 nights. And David said to him, "To whom do you belong, and where are you from?" He said, "I am a young man of Egypt, servant to an Amalekite, and my master left me behind because I fell sick 3 days ago. We had made a raid against the Negeb of the Cherethites, and against that which belongs to Judah, and against the Negeb of Caleb, and we burned Ziklag with fire." And David said to him, "Will you take me down to this band?" And he said, "Swear to me by God that you will not kill me or deliver me into the hands of my master, and I will take you down to this band." And when he had taken them down, behold, they were spread abroad. Talking about the Amalekites. I got a page to. They were spread abroad the land, eating and drinking and dancing, because of the great spoil they had taken from the land of the Philistines and from the land of Judah. And David struck them down from twilight into the evening of the next day. So he attacked them all night and all the next day, and not a man of them escaped except 400 young men who mounted camels and fled. David recovered all the Amalekites had taken, and David rescued his 2 wives. Nothing was missing, whether small or great, sons or daughters, spoil or anything that had been taken. David brought back all. David also captured all the flocks and herds, and the people drove the livestock before him and said, "This is David's spoil." So David came to the 200 men who had been too exhausted to follow David, who had been left at the brook Besor. And they went out to meet David and to meet the people who were with him. And when David came near to the people, he greeted them. Then all the wicked and worthless fellows among the men who had gone with David said, "Because they did not go with us, we will not give them any of the spoil we have recovered, except that each man may lead away his wife and children and depart." Now this is some of the stuff about David that is just really why God loved him so. And David said, "You shall not do so, my brothers. With what the Lord has given us, he has preserved us and given into our hand the band that came against us. Who would listen to you in this matter? For as his share is who goes down into the battle, so shall his share be who stays by the baggage. They shall share alike." And he made it a statute and a rule for Israel from that day forward to this day. David was going to look after all his people. all of them. When David came to Ziklag, he sent part of the spoil to his friends, the elders of Judah, saying, "Here is a present for you from the spoil of the enemies of the Lord." It was for those in Bethel and Ramoth of the Negeb, in Jatir, in Aor, in Sifmoth, in Eshtemoa, and Rechal, and in the cities of the Jerahmeelites, in the cities of the Kenites, and Horna, and Borashan, in Atak, in Hebron, for all the places where David and his men had roamed. So he had good things come from the hands of all these people when they were roaming and wandering, and now he was returning the, he was giving of his own hand also. Those that couldn't make it, that were wore out, and stayed and watched after the baggage, he gave to them their fair share too, even though some of the other men had said it calls them wicked and worthless fellows. Some of them went with them because they didn't want to share. Do you think of somebody who doesn't want to share the wicked as worthless fellows? That's what God said. If you don't want to share of your bounty and help someone else, God doesn't approve of that at all. We shouldn't be selfish. So we're going to go ahead and do this last chapter here too, of 1 Samuel. Does anybody have anything they want to say about what we've already been through here? So we see in the good side of David, we see in the bad side of David, but through it all, and as we get on in 2 Samuel later on, just keep in mind, he was a man after God's own heart. He made some awful mistakes. Ma'am?
There's hope for us too.
Yeah, there's hope for us too, I promise you.
David did all that good and bad.
Ma'am?
I said David did all that bad, but yet God blessed him.
That's right. Blessed him greatly. I mean, he's they used to call Jesus the son of David. He came right through that ancestral line. That's where Jesus came from. So you never know. God blessed him greatly. He's the one God had chosen. And it says, now the Philistines were fighting against Israel, and the men of Israel fled before the Philistines and fell slain on Mount Gilboa. And the Philistines overtook Saul and his sons, and the Philistines struck down Jonathan and Abinadab and Malchishua, the sons of Saul. So here's David's best friend in all the world. He gets slain fighting with his father. And that's going to come back later on too in the life of David. But we'll get to that when we get to it. The battle pressed hard against Saul, and the archers found him, and he was badly wounded by the archers. Then Saul said to his armor bearer, draw your sword and thrust me through with it, lest these uncircumcised come and thrust me through and mistreat me. But his armor bearer would not, for he feared greatly. Therefore Saul took his own sword and fell upon it. And when his armor bearer saw that Saul was dead, he also fell upon his sword and died with him. Thus Saul died, and his 3 sons, and his armor bearer, and all his men on the same day together. And when the men of Israel who were on the other side of the valley, and those beyond the Jordan, saw that the men of Israel had fled, and that Saul and his sons were dead, they abandoned their cities and fled. And the Philistines came and lived in them. The next day, when the Philistines came to strip the slain, they found Saul and his 3 sons fallen on Mount Gilboa. So they cut off his head, stripped off his armor, and sent messengers throughout the land of the Philistines to carry the good news to the house of their idols and the people. They put his armor in the temple of Ashtaroth, and they fastened his body to the wall of Bethshan. And when the inhabitants of Jabesh Gilead heard what the Philistines had done to Saul, all the valiant men arose and went all night and took the body of Saul and the bodies of his sons from the wall of Bethshan. And they came to Jabesh and burned them there. And they took their bones and buried them under the tamarisk tree in Jabesh and fasted 7 days. So that was the end of King Saul. Here's where David takes over as we get into 2 Samuel next time. And you see, there were some brave men that still went and got the body of Saul and his sons. And treated them respectfully. Saul did wrong. The Lord rejected him, but these brave men, they showed him their respect, because he had been God's anointed at one time. And can't nobody take away that except God. God wound up rejecting him. But so next time we come back, we're going to start getting into the actual kingship of kingship of David. Excuse me. Anybody got anything they'd like to add about this? Something that stuck out to them? Saul had happened to him exactly what that spirit or whatever had told him. You're going to be with me before the next day is over with. And that's exactly what happened. They never saw another sunset. All right. Y'all remember all our sick ones, and those need some relief. I'll tell you what, we got a lot of folks right now have got so much going on, and it's pressing down on us. And I'll just be honest with you, yeah. When you go to figuring all this stuff up that has happened and what's happening, people going on, the Lord's going to see us through us. I don't no doubt. I don't have no doubt about that. But at the same time, I can't help but feel it's an attack of the enemy. I really do. I really do. He don't want us to thrive here at this church. That's right. But we're going to continue on and pray for revival regardless of what's going on. It's easy to just say, well, what's the point? But we're gonna continue on trusting the Lord and preparing for this revival. Y'all be sure, keep your button on during the week. Keep it in front of you, if you feel of it or see it in the mirror or whatever. It'll remind you what's going on. If somebody says, what's all that about? You could say, well, it was a flag from the Revolutionary War. Or you can say, we're praying for revival at our church. We got an appeal to heaven. And won't you come when we have it? We want you to come. Yeah, that's right. That's right. Come on and do you know Jesus? I'm appealing to heaven for your soul. Anyhow.
I'll tell you this Sunday school when Tom nurses prayed for him a couple nights. And then when she left on Tuesday, I don't know why she had a church on Tuesday, but she told me she was saying pray for them and for us.
I'm going to ask Terry. Terry, will you pray for all these things and close us out?
Father God, I come to you this day and I thank you for this beautiful day, Lord, and we will rejoice and be glad in this day, Lord. I thank you for the grace and your mercy and your love, Lord, that you are a good God to us, Lord. And thank you for sending Jesus to die on the cross for us, Lord. Lord, I pray that today, I pray for Mary's family, Mary Simmons' family, Lord. they're